And now, you're tuned in to RBLR, the home of Tampa Bay's Reveler Sports.
Hello, everyone out there in Tampa Bay and beyond. This is James Knowles coming at you for the Rowdies section of the RBLR Sports podcast. As you can see, I am not here with my usual co-host, Carlos. Instead, I have Mr. USL Tactics himself, John Morrissey. So I will ask you, John, how are you doing this week?
Doing really well and really excited to be back for a second straight preseason to kind of talk about the league, talk about the Rowdies and where they fall.
Yeah. There's, obviously for Rowdies fans, there's a lot to talk about, but I'm sure that you are almost sick of it at this point with everything that you've been doing for the USL Championship. And probably, I don't know, do you also do the similar tactics for USL League One?
I dabble, but definitely a focus on the championship just because 27 teams is already quite a bit to try to keep my head around.
Yeah, I frankly, I don't know how you have all the time to do even the teams that you do work on, but we appreciate you for taking some of your time to help us Rowdies fans out and get a little bit better grasp on the season to come.
Yeah, appreciate it. I mean, I have a connection with the Rowdies, having done some opposition stuff with Neil in the past. So excited to be back, excited to engage with one of my favorite fan bases out there.
Perfect. We will certainly love to hear that. So, yeah, let's get into it. This Saturday, we are getting into the season overall. It actually starts with a home game versus Indy 11. And again, it is this Saturday. It is now time to cover the rest of the league that we did not get to last week because last week we did our Western Conference preview. So, thank you, John, like I said, for joining us. And just before we get started, I want to say, please follow us on YouTube as well as Facebook, Instagram, Twitter, everything, wherever you are, we are too. We are at RBLR Sports. So please look us up. Now, let's go ahead and get into it. Today, we're going to be looking at the East, and then as well, we're going to look at the Tampa Bay Rowdies specifically. So, John, I didn't want to take any of the thunder away from the work that you did because you put a lot of time into it, I'm sure. Could you give us generally your, Eastern Conference rankings and what you expect to see coming into the season with all of your predictions?
Yeah, so I mean, just going top to bottom, it seems pretty clear to me with an eye test and then by the numbers as well that Louisville City is probably the favorite going into 2023. They kept basically everyone of importance.
Yeah.
If there was a worry, it was the fact that they were going to be losing Josh Winder midseason when he was going to get sold for about $1 million over to Europe. And then they brought in Jordan Scarlett very recently to be the guy to step up. And obviously, Rowdies fans know he has experience in a high line, playing behind a high press. He'll fit like a glove there. So they feel solid. They feel safe. Tampa Bay, again, by the numbers and in my own reckoning, is the number 2 team in the conference with a bullet. Even with that Leo Fernandez injury, what this team has done, adding pieces in attack, creating so much depth in the midfield, and then bringing back Forrest Lasso and Jordan Doherty in the more defensive spaces, Connor Sparrow as well. Those are going to be huge changes, and I don't see anyone knocking off that duopoly at top. Behind that, it gets a little bit messier for me. Birmingham feels like they're going to be in the mix again. I have questions about their depth and defense, but I like a lot of what they've done in attack. If you think about like Tyler Pasher coming in, someone who is exceptional with Indy 11 a couple years ago and looked decent in MLS for 2 seasons. Memphis is going to be right there again. I do think they're going to take a small step back, having lost some of their defenders and crucially the coach of the year in Ben Pierman. But, I mean, they've got so much talent in attack. Their manager, Stephen Glass, is someone who has had mixed results in the USL and over in Scotland, but he's a veteran and he will get this team to the playoffs at a bare minimum. I think if I'm pondering who is in that next tier behind Louisville and Tampa Bay, I would lean into Indy 11, who y'all have this upcoming weekend. They've added all league players across the midfield, across the attack. Sebastian Guenzati certainly stands out in that regard, but Aiden Quinn, Cam Lindley are players with all league team nominations to their name in the past. They've revamped a defense that looked very slow last year. They feel like they're another team that I would guarantee to be in the playoffs. Get a little bit muddier from then on. I feel good about Tulsa, who has rebuilt pretty heavily. they let Lebo Moloto go. He's a central midfielder, one of the all-time leading assisters in the league, in fact. But with him and many of the pieces that they let walk, they were on the wrong side of 30. They looked a bit worse for the wear last season. And so Tulsa really leaned into a lot of younger players from MLS Next Pro, from the Canadian Premiership, who seem like they have potential. Miami would be the last team where I feel pretty confident about them being in the mix. They feel like they're always sixth or seventh, never much more, never much less. I don't love what they did in the offseason, but beyond losing Connor Sparrow, I don't think they've lost a whole lot. And they have a couple lottery ticket type pieces with a lot of upside that they've signed, so they'll be there. Muddier here on out. If you ask me who the last team into the playoffs is going to be, it'll be the Charleston Battery. Ben Pierman moved from Memphis to Charleston. He didn't bring in any superstars necessarily, but the big problems this team had last year were in their back line, in the net, and then lacking a real central creator. And they've addressed that with AJ Cochran, who's been all over the league at the center back spot. Trey Muse coming in goal. Pierman coached him last season in Memphis to rather good results. And then they've added a couple pieces at that number 10 spot. They aren't going to be world beaters in year one under Pierman, but I think they're going to make a market improvement. Pittsburgh, always competitive, but they've lost a lot of players. Russell Cicerone, who's scored double-digit, more than a dozen goals for them in each of the past 2 years, is gone. Alex Dixon, who moved over to Monterrey, Danny Griffin, the anchor in the midfield. They didn't really add any players of note. I guess Junior Eto would be the one that y'all are somewhat familiar with in that defensive midfield spot, but I have my doubts on them repeating the successes that they've had in past seasons. I should throw a word in for Detroit. It's been a bit tumultuous, myself and that fan base this offseason, but yeah, I'm sure anyone knows. But they're still going to be a very strong defensive team, but they scored about 40 goals last year, and the players responsible for more than 20 of them are gone, and they've replaced them with very, very little of proven merit. So I think that's why I'm doubting in Detroit. And then wrapping up at the bottom, Hartford and Loudoun. Hartford clearly above Loudoun, though. Hartford has some really awesome pieces that they've picked up. Antoine Hoppeneau coming over from Detroit after leading the league in assists stands out. But I just don't believe in that defense. I don't think they addressed the real core problems that sunk them last year. So they're going to score some goals and they're going to be more competitive, but they don't have the legs to get into the playoffs. And I've spoken a lot already, but Loudoun is Loudoun. They're young. They're going to rely on players without much merit and mettle in the USL. They can surprise you on their day because that's what a young, hungry, high-pressing team does, but they won't be making the playoffs.
Yeah, I am interested in Loudoun in terms of the project of what it's going to turn into with their they've announced a new ownership group at this point. So
yes, the same owners as the Bowie Bay Sox, the AAA team in that same kind of Northern Virginia area.
So at some point, I imagine that ownership group probably bought it because they didn't want it to just be a feeder team for DC United. Although, I haven't spoken to anybody, so I guess I don't know. But, otherwise, I'm not sure why you would be purchasing it to try and revamp it. But whatever, we'll see how that goes. That is probably a storyline for, maybe a year or two down the road. But
absolutely.
With all of that then being said, and we appreciate obviously you going through the whole list there because it's a lot to compile, and I know that you spend a lot of time just it's not just like you said the eye test. I can go through and look at a roster in 20 minutes on Wikipedia or fewer, and be like, okay, this is what I think, but that might not mean much. You obviously put a lot more work into it. So with that now being said, what are the big narratives out of the East that go a little bit deeper than just, the rankings? I have a couple in mind, but I wanted to see what you had, that come to the front of your mind immediately. And then we'll break it down into what might be more important to Rowdies fans specifically in a bit.
Yeah, I think one of the big things is what is the effect of losing New York Red Bulls 2 and Atlanta United 2, where, say what you will about some of those New York teams in the past that were title contenders, but for 2, 3 years, those teams have been 3 easy points for pretty
Yeah.
much everybody. And by getting rid of that, there really aren't easy games in this league. That's a lot more parity. It makes every game matter that much more. And with the amount of travel, with the amount of effort you have to expend, I think that we're going to be looking at a table that's a lot tighter when you're getting down to the nitty gritty at the end of the season. That's a big one for me. In a tactical sense, I think that, especially nearer to the top of the East, you've got a lot of teams that have moved away from defensive soccer, tried to build systems that are a lot more based on possession, a lot more based on trying to control the ball. So if you're someone like a Tampa Bay, who I think with the loss of Leo Fernandez, with some of the moves they've made, where do you fit in the mix? By zagging a little bit in terms of your style, are you able to get some results against teams that just aren't used to that kind of game? So that's an interesting one. And I do think that one more I'll touch on is the source of players that you're bringing in. Someone like
Mhm.
the Rowdies, by and large, has leaned into people with that USL championship pedigree. By comparison, I know I touched on Tulsa, focusing on college kids, the CPL, that sort of thing. Birmingham, despite the star power at forward, they've pretty much filled out their back line with players who were good in college last year. I think that there's a lot of potential and a lot of upside for those sorts, but I think you're also introducing a bit of risk into your
Yeah.
team
Right.
by not having those pieces that you can rely on for the 34 weeks of the season.
I mean, if you cut it back to, and I do watch college soccer when I can. So I
Mhm.
think that there is a lot of talent out there, but they're just
Sure.
not in the same type of environment that you're going to get in the USL Championship, let alone, leagues above that. They are doing a season that starts in August and I think at the latest ends in November. So, I mean,
Right.
you know, they're playing a couple games a week, but it's just not the same kind of environment and it's not the same kind of demands.
Yeah, and so the statistical model that I use to try and map out where teams are going to land, it's based on player by player projections that then get summed up for teams. And I've looked at the effect of like what is the outcome you get from these college kids. By and large, they end up playing about less than 10 games worth of minutes in total and having a small effect. It's
Interesting.
those diamonds in the rough, though, that you end up getting a couple of real high impact guys every year that end up making that big difference. So if you're a team like a Birmingham who might be starting two recent graduates at both of your fullback spots, if both of them hit, that's game changing for you. So that's something I'm always interested in.
Yeah, and that's a cool thing to think about. With I also just like one of the things that I like about soccer the most is like seeing which young players are going to be the ones that hit and would succeed. But everyone has their own stuff to follow, obviously. So, if I can ask you, John, a couple of things that I was
Mhm.
thinking of from this off season, a couple of quick narratives were, especially I suppose this one is more related to us Rowdies fans, but Lee Cohen has moved on to Charleston Battery. It seems like he has really hit the ground running. And I know that, if you're a Rowdies fan, you will expect that Lee Cohen has a lot of good stuff in him. And they went and they got, like you said, the coach of the year from 2022. I think that they revamped the roster pretty much. And not only did they revamp it, but it seems to me that they brought in a lot of talent. Now, you said that they are kind of on the playoff bubble, and I think that that's just because putting a new team together is difficult, of course. But
Mhm.
if you could break it down a little more for us, what do you see from Charleston? What do you think that Ben Pierman is going to be able to do with this new group of players that he probably hasn't worked too much with before?
Sure. So the Charleston team of 2022 under Connor Casey never felt like they could find an identity for what they were doing tactically. They were switching between back threes and back fours on the regular. Oftentimes, when they found success, it came through the high press. But then, when teams sort of figured that out, they played a lot more direct, and the back line completely collapsed. So it was really a failure of a season in a lot of regards. Pierman is someone who brings in a very possessive sort of style. He is high pressing as well, but he does so with a lot of organization, and he's retooled the defense to support that sort of system. I mentioned AJ Cochran coming into the defense. They signed a defender, Juan Sebastian Palma from Colombia, with a lot of experience down there. They're 4 or 5 deep at center back. They've improved in goal as well. That's all really a safety net. I do think that when you're inheriting a forward like Augustin Williams, who was in the All League team last season, that's really something that you can hang your hat on in terms of the offense. They've added a few other forwards, but Williams is going to be make or break. So much of what Pearman relied on last season in Memphis was Philip Goodrum scoring a lot of goals, I believe more than 20, but also contributing in the press. And that's not really what you've seen from Williams in the past. So I think finding that balance is going to be difficult, but a lot of the tools are here to execute what you would traditionally think of the Pearman style. I have some questions on the wings in terms of the creativity, maybe some of the defensive steel. I think that they aren't very deep in the midfield in general, but overall, they've taken such a clear step forward that they've gone from cellar dwellers who finished in that same caliber as New York and Atlanta to a team that can really compete in this conference.
Yeah, I mean, just for the Lee Cohen's sake, I would like to see them do well, but I would like to possibly see them not do well against us, of course, and then we'll see how it plays out down the road. But he's definitely proven he's proven himself capable of building a team, and it's always interesting to see where that pans out.
Well, the culture change, just to hit on one thing there, the culture change that you've seen at that club in terms of their ambition, and you can chalk almost all of that up to Cohen, has been really impressive. They brought in Mexican-American youth international, Fidel Barajas.
Yeah.
He's another one of those types that could get sold for a high 6-digit, low 7-digit fee in the coming years. He's really special, and that's not something you saw out of Charleston for really ever before Cohen came in. So a feather in his cap.
Yeah, I was watching the U17 World Cup qualifiers from CONCACAF, and Mexico steamrolled everybody, including the U.S., unfortunately. But Fidel Barajas was far and away one of the best players on that team, and it was kind of weird to me because he's from, I think, the San Jose Earthquakes youth system, and it's weird that they would let a player like that go by not giving him the homegrown contract, but maybe that he didn't be tied to MLS. I don't know all of the ins and outs there. It's just very interesting to see from our perspective down here. Team that you said was on the playoff bubble that I wanted to ask you about was Tulsa. I believe that they are working with a new coach this year, and you mentioned obviously with their roster and how they were trying to build. So what do you see from Tulsa coming up this year?
Yeah, you hit on it, but Blair Gavin is the new manager there. He was an assistant with Phoenix Rising for those very successful Western title winning seasons under Rick Schantz. Moved on to MLS in the Columbus Crew and was an assistant there very successfully. He's another coach who, much in the vein of Pearman, wants to play high press, wants to possess the ball with a lot of panache. They have so much talent in this team that never felt like it was properly weaponized last season.
I kind of felt that way.
Yeah, and they fired their coach midway through last year and sort of signaled, listen, whatever happens, happens for half of the year, but we're just going to work towards the rebuild. If you think about like a Marcus Epps or Rodrigo da Costa, those are two attackers that have been in the all-league teams before. These are really elite level players who didn't have a striker to finish off. They didn't have much of a defense or a midfield with any coherence. I feel like that elite, and if you think about the playoff expansion as well, which is something I should have hit on earlier, one more team in the East is getting in than last season. Mm-hmm. Tulsa was 8th already. They're losing arguably just one key player, and they've weaponized with more than a dozen new signings. It feels to me like they are trending in the right direction, especially given that teams like Pittsburgh and Detroit have taken a step back. So I think there's sort of the playing the odds element there, and I do think that they return a pretty great core.
Yeah, that was one of the away trips that I was considering, and then I was like, oh, this game is in August, and I feel like Tulsa in August sounds terrible, so I decided not to, but it wasn't because I didn't want to see the team. I definitely do like them, and Blair Gavin actually is He is one of those players that I saw play college soccer. He was with Michael Nanchoff in college. If
Oh wow.
Rowdies fans remember that name back at, they were both together at Akron. But either way, yeah, I have liked him. I wish that he kind of had a better career in MLS. It doesn't always work out. So now he gets to be a coach, and we see how that does. But yeah, that was another guy that I wanted to talk about. And I won't go too far into Detroit. I'll spare you that one because I'm sure everybody's seen it online. But one team that I will ask you for a little bit more about over this offseason is Pittsburgh. I found it to be weird in Pittsburgh.
Yeah, no doubt about it with them. I think on the sly, even though they've been really competitive, one of the best 3 or 4 teams in the East for the past couple of years, they've done so on what's never been much of a budget.
Sure.
They've had some of those higher end types at the top of the roster for sure, but many of them were players that Bob Lilly was familiar with. He was able to get them to come to Pittsburgh for a salary that was maybe a step back from what they could have got elsewhere. And then he basically had a 100% hit rate signing those college players to fill out the depth of the roster. And so, I mean, this is another trend that just because we don't know much about salaries, but in informal conversations I've heard, there's been a real upward spike in the wage bills across the league, in some
Hmm.
of the teams at least. And I think that hit Pittsburgh in a hard way. I know I hit on a couple of the names, but Russell Cicerone, their best forward, is gone. Alex Dixon, Denny Griffin. In defense, Shane Wheat leaving is a big deal. He was their best central defender, and then they let 2 of their other regular starters in that spot go. In so many ways, you could argue that they probably lost 8 of their 11 best players just in terms of the starting lineup. They also waited a very long time to start replacing those pieces. Pittsburgh announced,
Yeah.
I believe, 7 or 8 new signings last week, which obviously those guys have been training with the club. They've had the full preseason, but the vibe is very much wrong there. And Bob Lilly, as the manager, is someone who asks a lot of his players. He's known to be a bit of a hothead. He's very visibly seen yelling on the sidelines and aggressively taking on his own talent a lot of the time. You can envision a world where this team is slow out of the gates. He starts to lose a clubhouse of people who don't really have a lot of chemistry, and this team just doesn't have the talent to make up for it. So I think that would be my worry for the Riverhounds.
Gotcha. Yeah, it's going to be like everything we've talked about so far. It will be interesting to see how it plays out. But I was, I appreciate your bit of insight there too, because I wasn't. It just didn't seem like it's the same type of roster that we've seen from them in the past, anyway. But yeah, I guess that makes sense with all the aforementioned considerations. So, John, if we can do one more thing here in the East, obviously, I think that Rowdies fans specifically will expect that Louisville City are going to be good. You also mentioned Memphis as a possibility, and I would like to know what you think in terms of, what are our biggest rivals and what are we looking like maybe compared to them in a little bit, more terms, and then if you also have any like surprise packages along the way.
Yeah, I mean, I think if there is a team that is going to jump up into that Tampa Bay Louisville tier, Indy is going to be the one to do it.
Mhm.
Memphis and Birmingham, while they were closest certainly last season, neither of them took the leap, and they both lost a decent number of key pieces from their squads. Indy 11 feel like they've completely rebuilt the team in a meaningful manner. Some of the players that you would know from indie teams in the past, whether it be Nabil Hackshaw, an Aozi, Manuel Ardiaga, players certainly who had a lot of talent, but for my taste, looked like they were disinterested last season, slow last season, didn't fit what Mark Lowry was trying to instill in terms of a style. Those guys are all gone. And the players that have come in to replace them are elite without a shadow of a doubt. I mentioned a lot of the names in the midfield and the attack. I think it's worthwhile to know that Solomon Asante is coming off a full preseason now. That's multiple time
Yeah.
MVP Solomon Asante. They're getting Jonas Fjällberg back from a loan to RGV. I think he was right on the verge of double-digit goals there. He's going to be a
Hmm.
big deal. They've rebuilt the defense really nicely as well. Picked up Jonas Budati from Hartford.
Yeah,
Brought
yeah,
in, yeah, Yannick Odell in net, who he was another guy who was with Hartford, but on loan from the Revolution in Major League Soccer. Added a couple center backs. So there's the talent is there. I do think there's a question of depth, but the roster construction seems so intelligent, so tailored to what Lowry tries to do with that 4-4-2 diamond shape in the middle that I have a tough time seeing them be bad. And I think that they really do have more upside to challenge at the high levels than anybody else.
gotcha. Well, all right. With all of that being said, I think we should probably get into our Indy 11 home opener preview. But John, if you'll give me 2 seconds here, I want to take a little break to go through and talk about the RBLR Sports Shop. So, of course, liking and subscribing here is free. But if you think that you might need some new threads coming up this year and possibly you want to support our podcast at the same time, you can help us out that little bit more by heading over to shop.rblrsports.com. There is obviously a link here, and there will be a link in the description. You can also use the promo code COYR for 10% off your order. Please, obviously, check it out. I think that you will find something that you like and possibly might even want to wear to a Rowdies game. All right, now with that, John, let's hop into our preview here. So there is one big thing from Rowdy's preseason, obviously, that was not known up until Friday of last week, which was the day after Carlos and I recorded our Western Conference preview, and that is Leo Fernandez being out. He is going to miss the entire season with an injury to his Achilles tendon. And yeah, I really wonder. Last year, Leo Fernandez was given this kind of role where he could almost do whatever he wanted, and it was to great effect. You know, he was our most important player and ultimately the most important player to one individual team in the whole league. So, you know, you have to take all of that into consideration when we say that he is out now. What do you think that that means for us going into this season overall? But, you know, I suppose we can kind of try to narrow it a little bit for Indy as well and see, like, what do you think the Rowdies might be able to put together tactically or otherwise without him being there?
Yeah, I mean, in terms of what Leo adds to the team, and I think you really nicely summed it up that he's the spark plug that has the freedom to rove wherever he wants, get the ball at his feet, and just go at you and create. And he won the MVP award because no one else in the USL is quite as good at that skill. I think that you're probably going to see someone like a Charlie Dennis come in for him, maybe, and Dennis showed off the potential to have a modicum of that ability, but he's no Leo Fernandez. In the context of Indy, I think it's important because the diamond midfield that they play with one defensive midfielder is naturally a little bit leaner in the middle. Having someone like a Fernandez being able to hammer home, get the ball in those spaces is really the matchup nightmare that would break Indy down most obviously. And that's not to say that all hope is lost for Tampa Bay. I think that, as expected, if uh, Cal Jennings and JJ Williams get the start up top, they have a really unique set of skills that can cause trouble for any defense. I think, in particular, Jennings is very adept at dropping deep, picking up the ball. He's good shepherding transition moves. He did so a lot on the break with Las Vegas last year. So those two are going to be good. Naturally that 4-4-2 diamond is pretty narrow. So I would look at the wingbacks, thinking about like a Dayon Harris. I don't
Yeah.
know who's going to start on the right, maybe Antley or Dalgard. They're going to have some room to create trouble, get some crosses in. The way that Tampa plays, for me, is pretty well designed to cause trouble for Indy 11. So I would be
Okay.
feeling good. I think Indy, naturally, because of the overhaul they've had, is going to take a little bit of time to get used to one another. Whereas Tampa Bay, at least in defense, is what, 6 or 7 players who, even if they weren't in the team last season, know the Neil Collins system, have played for Collins before. and that's invaluable in these first couple weeks of the year.
Yeah, I think with the returnees that you're referring to, and as you said, even if they aren't maybe used to whatever tactics specifically he's going to employ this year, I doubt that there's going to be such such a radical change that they won't
Right.
be able to adapt slightly to whatever that will be. My other question with the Rowdies specifically, before we get into this, is just that the Rowdies roster right now is 23 players, and then if you take out Leo Fernandez, obviously that is only two full 11s worth of players. Um, Being in your position previously, where you actually got to do breakdowns for the team and say, "Hey, this is what you need." I'm hoping you might have a little bit more insight as opposed for what it means for a team to have like a full roster over the course of a whole season here, and does that give you any concern that the roster is too small? I'm assuming that, some of these college players who were in preseason with MLS, they, might have another chance sign on with the Rowdies, and I hope that that gets, gives us some more depth. But do you see any cause for concern with the size of the roster here?
I'm not overly concerned. The average roster in the league right now is only about 21 players, so Tampa Bay is in line with where you would expect to be at this stage of things.
Gotcha. Okay.
In the Eastern Conference, actually, only Tulsa and Louisville have more players signed right now, which is kind of crazy to think about. But
Yeah.
what's good with the Rowdies is that there isn't really any fat in the squad. Like every one of those 22 pieces can really contribute and has shown that in the past where, I mean, not to degrade anyone in particular, but there are teams, let's be real, who get a lot weaker at the bottom. Whereas you could feasibly field two legitimate lineups of Rowdies players that feel like they could at least compete. And I think that's a luxury a lot of teams don't have. So I
Sure.
think I would feel good in that regard.
Okay. Well, that was a concern of mine going in. So honestly, that does allay my fears a little bit. But good to hear. So yeah, with Leo being out and still a good roster size as you said, then let's just hop into the game at hand. We play Indy 11. I'll go through their preseason real quickly. I don't think that it
Yeah.
matters too much to consider the results, but it's good to list them out. There were four preseason games I found listed on their website at least. That was a 3-1 win over Butler University, a 5-1 win over Indiana Wesleyan University, another 5-1 win over Chicago Fire 2, which I'm assuming is mostly academy players, of course, and then a 1-0 win over USL League One forward Madison. So 2022, Indy finished ninth in the East. They did not qualify for the playoffs, and this is despite bringing in their experienced coach in the USL level. But now he's had all of the year that he had, and he's had this preseason, including bringing in a lot of signings. So if you could now, John, give us more of a background. You said that Indy was probably one of the teams that could make this jump. What do you see specifically in terms of tactics and players that you've already listed a couple who might be able to contribute to that jump that you see Indy possibly making?
Yeah, so I think it's somewhat rare at this level for teams to air their preseason games, but Indy 11, that Indiana Wesleyan game, ended up on some sort of Twitter live stream that I tuned into. In terms of the system, you base it, it's that 4-3-3. You could call it a 4-2-2 or a 4-4-2 diamond if you wanted. They're going to play with three creative midfielders in that central line who all stay pretty narrow, but they're all very capable on the ball. You can't just key in on one player without leaving space that's going to be dangerous for another. And that's really the bread and butter for them. The attack tends to be rather narrow as well. So you're dependent on your fullbacks getting high up the pitch and creating. But naturally, because of that setup, when you're so reliant on just two wide players in your system, you're going to leave room on the counter attack. And I think that's somewhere where Tampa Bay can benefit because of the wingbacks. Tampa Bay can benefit because someone like a Cal Jennings is so good moving in transition.
Mm-hmm.
Indy, in terms of the offense, though, when you have players like Guenzati and Solomon Asante who can get their ball on the feet, they can use their speed, their creativity. They know how to run off of one another and create space without that searing pace, even. They're going to cause trouble for any defense that there is. I think it's going to be an important game for Jordan Doherty to really come out big. I'm assuming he gets the start in the defensive midfield. He's a player that I rate very highly. I think he's so intelligent. I think his positional sense is very strong in the center of the pitch, but he's got a big task against a team that has three all league caliber central midfielders. So I think that's going to be the real war zone here. Indy's big weakness, as I mentioned, is depth, but I also am not really sure what they're going to do with the back line. I think that Gustavo Ricci, a player that they brought in from Rochester and MLS Next, is fantastic. He's been in the USL before, but Lowry looks like he's going to start Mishak Jerome at the other center back spot. Rowdies fans of a certain vintage would recognize Jerome from his days with Jacksonville in the NASL. But I think in saying that, it gives you an indication he's older, he's slower. I personally think he should be coming off the bench, but Lowry trusts him a lot.
Mm-hmm.
He's someone that you should be attacking. I don't know if he's going to have instant chemistry with the aforementioned Yunus Budati on the right side. So that feels like somewhere that you can probably get some joy out of, especially if you're using a Dayon Harris who is so fast at that spot. I think he could really create some danger.
Gotcha. And one thing that I wanted to mention, I don't know how much of the Rowdies preseason you might or might not have seen. I don't think that was very readily available, but the game against Montreal that we had for preseason, that was for season ticket openers to go. So I went to that, and I don't want to put this in a way that would sound degrading, but Jordan Doherty looked a lot more mobile than he ever has for me. And, that's not to say that he was ever like, I don't know, an overweight player or sluggish or anything along those lines, but I was just really taken aback. It seemed like he had gone to Ireland and maybe come back and he was like, I don't know, even more Energizer bunny than he possibly could have had previously. And I thought that was going to be, maybe an interesting factor in it, but obviously we'll see how it plays out. So I've got a bit of a potential starting 11 here. You tell me if this is maybe something that you might be leaning towards. So I had Yannick Otto, someone that you had mentioned, Mishak Jerome that you mentioned, Adrian Dispe, and Yunus Budati, and then Brian Rebellon, which that's kind of what I was thinking for the back line, not too sure. And then Solomon Asante, Cam Lindley, Aiden Quinn, and Jonas Fjellberg, maybe, mixing things up somewhere along in the midfield. And I'm assuming it might be Sebastian Guanzotti and maybe Stefano Pino up top. Is that something that the Rowdies fans might be able to expect from, how Indy could approach this game?
Yeah, you're definitely reasonable with that. I think just two nitpicks would be, I certainly could see Adrian Dispe starting, but he pretty recently got traded over to Indy, so I think it might be a couple weeks before he's like nailed on in the lineup, but would not be shocked.
No, that does make sense though.
Yeah, and then Pino is the one. He actually left the squad, I believe, to go back home to Brazil. Don't quote me on that, but he's not on the roster anymore.
Oh well, I must have made a mistake in my putting that together. But well, I mean that would obviously rule him out, wouldn't it?
Yeah.
But okay, so yeah, those are. But that's generally like.
No, you're there. Yeah, in terms of that team, though.
With the Rowdies preparing for all of these lines, these are the kind of players that the coach would have brought in to suit the system that you have seen him play previously, like in I think El Paso before.
Yeah. Yeah, gotcha. Absolutely. Yeah. I mean, he's someone, I think a lot of managers at this level are pretty naturally pragmatic. They don't have a identity that they lean into. Lowry is absolutely someone who has a style. He wants players to fit that style. And that's been true with Jacksonville way back when, with El Paso, certainly, and to great success in El Paso.
Yeah.
So, yeah, he's someone with a real take on how the game should be played.
Gotcha. Well, yeah, I mean, obviously Rowdies fans are going to want to fancy their chances here. And I think that just because it is a home opener, there's going to be a lot of momentum just literally coming from the stands. And, hopefully that will help us out on the field too. But, with all of that now being said, I think that we have a pretty good understanding of any, tactical expectations that we can have out there. Is there anything else that you would have to highlight for Rowdies fans coming into this game? There's the narrative, obviously, that they have three of our former players, Juan Tejada, Jack Blake, and Sebastian Guinzotti. Is there anything else that you think could impact the way that this game plays out? I imagine Sebastian Guinzotti might have a little chip on his shoulder just because anytime that a team lets you go, regardless of what happened in your previous life with that team, you're always going to, kind of want to come in like that. Maybe that plays a factor or not. What do you see out there?
Yeah, that's a fun angle to go at this from. I would point to Tejada coming off the bench with a lot of fire late in the game.
Mhm.
I mean, that's something you're familiar with, certainly, as something that could be a factor. I wouldn't be shocked to see him start in the forward line just because Lowry would think, okay, if there's any matchup where he's going to come out at 101%, like that would be the game. He's someone to watch for sure. Blake, I think, is going to start in this midfield, and with Quinn and Lindley beside him, he's probably the most mobile of the three, which says a lot about the level of athleticism in the midfield. But I think he's going to bear a lot of the burden on the right side to cover defensively. He'll be important for sure. If you're Tampa Bay, I would again point to like the new faces really want to come out, show that they're for real, that they can keep up the level that has rendered the Rowdies so dominant in the East for a couple of seasons. So I think like JJ Williams stands out to me as a real hard-nosed guy, a player who cares about how he's seen by the fans.
Mm-hmm.
I think he's going to want to get a goal. So just in an intangible sense, who has that fire to really prove that they're legit?
Gotcha. I mean, with any season opener, I think that everybody loves to get that debut goal, so to speak. It's a good idea for any fan or any player to that's the thing that they want most in their first game. So I would love that. And I what I'm hopeful for on our end is just that possibly with players like Forrest Lasso being in the back, it might be a case that they kind of also do know the tendencies of the forwards involved here, Sebastian Guinzotti and Juan Tejada. So
Yeah.
maybe that comes back on our end as a little bit of a good factor too.
No, I think that's a really good point, and I hadn't even thought about the fact that, I mean, most of these Rowdies guys have spent years training with Guinzotti and Tejada. Like, I think that gives them a leg up for sure.
Yeah, and Sebastian Guinzotti, obviously, I have a lot of affection for him as a player and a person, but I do think in terms of going up against Forrest Lasso specifically, we'll see who comes up against partners alongside him, but specifically with Forrest Lasso, there's an obvious size advantage there. So
Sure,
we'll see how that plays out.
Indy's not going to be a high tempo team either, which I think plays into Lasso's hands. Like, that's not to say that he isn't excellent in every scenario, but if you're just letting him sit in the box, defend in a kind of static kind of game, that is his bread and butter.
He can eat it. Yeah, he can eat that up. Yeah, I personally like our odds going in here, but it is obviously all very good food for thought going in and making sure that we kind of have all of our bases covered, at least in terms of what we can expect. Neil Collins is the one who's actually trying to cover those bases and hide them away from people. But yeah. All right. Well, so John, what we usually do at the end of a preview coming up on a game is we will do our predictions and see, what our score line might be for the upcoming week. So I will let you fill in for Carlos this week because he is obviously not here. He is enjoying some sun that he would not be getting up in DC normally. So I'll let you start us off and give your prediction for the upcoming game on Saturday night.
Yeah, so I think I've tipped my hand that I'm seeing a lot of ways that the Rowdies kind of have an edge in this one. I think Indy might be due for a little bit of a slower start just because of the way that they've rebuilt. I think that this game being at Al Lang is a semi-big deal as well. It's going to be close. This isn't a bad Indy 11 squad by any stretch of the imagination. I'm going to go 2-1 Rowdies win.
All right. So, yeah, I thought that was relatively kind of where I was leaning to. And with that being said, I'm going to pick the Rowdies also to win here. I'm going to say actually a 3-0 win to start off the season. But yeah, so we will do that, and I want to return to our predictions when we get to our extra time segment here. But thank you very much, John. I appreciate, obviously, all of your help with that, and I will just run through these really fast and then get a couple probable little extra things from you as we hit our last bit here. So yeah, our final preseason game for the Rowdies was against USF. It was a win on Friday, but as I said, it was without Leo Fernandez, so we do have to keep that in mind. Both of those things happened on Friday, at least online. And yeah, it is finally game time, folks. We've been talking about it, obviously, all this last couple minutes here, and please join us. Please come out to the Rowdies game at Al Lang on Saturday at 7:30. And yeah, there's obviously so much to talk about with the narratives that we have just gone through and former players, everything. What have you been listening to? You got to show up at this point, right? So yeah, with that all now being said, this year we're going to continue with the RBLR Rowdies Cup, which is our predictions list. And John, that's why I've had you fill in for Carlos here so that he can possibly pick up some points off of your prediction. What we do from the past is we will have, and I'm going to include Eureka in this. So if Eureka, you can drop your prediction in the chat, that'll be good. We can go 0 points for you don't get the results or the score line, 1 point if you get the result, and 3 points if you get both the result and the score line. So John, you have already covered for Carlos, and I think that he might have the edge here now because you are Mr. USL Tactics. You are, and from everything I've seen online, if you can piss off that many people, you must be right.
Yeah, that's a word to live by.
So I have seen Eureka, our producer's prediction, a 2-0 win for the Rowdies. And all right, we'll see how it plays out. All of us are predicting a win at least, and I'm assuming that that is pretty good. But the last question that I have, and John, if you have any suggestions, I would certainly appreciate them. We do not have a victor's prize for the RBLR Rowdies Cup here. Last year I won, but I do want to say I got a pretty good head start because Carlos joined halfway through the season and Leo did not have all of his predictions over the course of the year. So even combining Leo and Eureka, I ended up winning it, and it wasn't the biggest blowout of a win for someone who had the head start that I did, but I still did win. This year, though, I would actually like us to have something to be working towards. So anyone listening, if you have any suggestions for the victor's prize of our cup, that would be great. John, if you have any suggestions off the top of your head, I don't know if I'm putting you on the spot too much here. I know that might have been the one thing you did not, prepare for.
No, I mean, something like apparel, Rowdy-centric wise is always a win. 6-pack of Iron Brew, just because, I don't know.
Yeah, I wouldn't mind some Iron Brew being involved in it. Maybe if we could get enough Iron Brew to fill a dunk tank, that would be, maybe that's maybe that's like a Patreon goals type of thing. While we don't yet have a Patreon, but we'll see how it works in the end. So yeah, we'll go from there. And yeah, like I said, listeners, if you do have any suggestions, please put them out to us on Twitter. Of course, that's where we will be. And I think, John, that will do it for tonight. Thank you for joining us, and thank you for all of your help in terms of getting the Rowdies fans not only better prepared for the season, but also better prepared for this home opener coming up.
Yeah, appreciate it. Just real quick in terms of the plugs of it all, co-host the USL show every Tuesday. Check out Backheeled. It's the site where those epic, 4,000 words, write a ton about every team power rankings that I do are going to be this year. If you're a fan of that insanity, check out Backheeled. But other than that, thank you so much for having me on. Love the discussion.
Actually, yeah, while we're here, I'll do that one more. So I did subscribe to Backheeled when it came out. Joe Lowry, I think, is the guy who founded it, and I love Joe Lowry and his tactics and everything. And then obviously, because he wanted to cover soccer in America, I think that he did a great job of pulling in the right people so that he's covering all the leagues, and he's got NWSL covered, he's got the USL covered with yourself. I mean, how has that been going for you kind of, writing for Backfield and all of the, I don't know how much, collaborating you're doing, but Joe is like the tactics voice in America, I feel. And it must be so cool, at least from my end, to see that you guys are working together on putting that, making that website as good as it has been.
Yeah, I mean, Joe got the thing going midway through what would have been the USL season last year. And he reached out to me before this was even off the ground floor and said, "Hey, can you be the guy who's covering the USL for us?" And I mean, it was kind of crazy for me at the time just because he's so well known in this space. And Joe is a guy who, like, he had a Rising Tactics account at some point. He's covered this league at a deep level. He cares about the USL Championship, and we're trying to be as holistic as possible in hitting that. We've got, in my opinion, second to none MLS coverage. You hit on the NWSL as well. I got to talk about the US national team a lot during the World Cup run. So if you have any interest in any facet of American soccer, it's worth checking out. And if you think I do a good job with the USL, like, all of my stuff in long form is there.
Yeah, I do want to say again, I really do like the work that they do at Backfield, yourself included. But I am one of the guys who is trying to get into the more tactical side of it. I grew up playing, and you don't glean as much as you might have thought, but it's not like I reached a very high level anyway. So saying that you're playing just in high school doesn't mean a ton at this point, but. I read your book recommendation when you were on last year, and I appreciate getting the articles that you guys put out, because it does give you that much more of an understanding of, like, this is the kind of stuff you look for, and in addition to, this is the kind of stuff that you might expect to see. So yeah, it's I really appreciate it.
Yeah, thank you for that.
Absolutely. Well, thank you for putting out the content. And again, thank you for joining us. So now with that, I will draw it to a close here. But listeners, thank you for tuning in. Please follow us on at RBLR Sports on Instagram, Twitter, Facebook, and YouTube, of course. We are on all of those websites and more. I am on Twitter at RBLR James K. And John, you said you're at USL Tactics.
Yep.
All right. Well, there we both are. And you can find all of us at the RBLR Sports Show on Twitter. We are there, and you can use the hashtag #AskRBLR if you have any other questions or any of those suggestions that I requested. Please like and subscribe to our podcast. We're on Spotify, the iHeartRadio app, Apple and Google Podcasts. We are on YouTube again, and all other major podcast platforms. So with one more week to go and one game coming up on Saturday, come on, you Rowdies.
Thank you for tuning into this presentation by RBLR Sports. On your way out of the stadium, please remember to like and subscribe.